Uh, yes. Um, a similar example can be there is a film Spellbound in which the main character has this guilt that he is responsible for his brother's death, and the guilt is unconscious and he just carries it on and tries to punish himself for a crime which was committed only in fantasy. So this brings out two elements. One, fantasy can be as powerful as reality in the psychic world, and two, people can carry on punishing themselves for an unconscious guilt they are not aware about for years to come in various ways they can't even imagine from where it's coming. Therefore, the exploration of unconscious guilt is very necessary, and this will lead us to the inquiry on the sources of sadism, masochism, and so on. So we are still not going there, that if in somebody sadism or masochism is very high, is it just because of nature, or have some psychological phenomena also occurred which have multiplied it? So there will be an element of nature, there will be an element of nurture, the experiences. And obviously for most people, both of them go together. Either they cancel or they multiply each other. So we will come later to understanding if somebody is a sadistic personality, why is he so sadistic? So there we will go into the causes of sadism, causes of masochism, causes of voyeurism, and so on. But before we go there, for the moment we are just trying to understand these elemental concepts by looking at their manifestation in different contexts. And after that we'll go into the causes of it and how they play out in different situations. And we can also look at where a particular personality fits in, because in the society each of them can contribute in a sublimated way in certain roles. So masochism, can you give examples? First, pathological, sublimated, everyday, mythological.
I think in everyday, not a very on a conscious level example, but on a subconscious level, a simple thing like someone being unable to wake up on time to be able to have a nice routine before their day starts. Say, for example, they're working. So before their work starts, to try and have a routine is very difficult for them because of some unconscious maybe guilt or anger or any difficult emotion that they have, which prevents them from doing something that they know on paper is good for them. And
right.
Yeah.
So any reduction in self-care, any reduction in doing good to yourself, denying pleasure when you can easily have it, all of that is under masochism of different categories. It may not be only dramatic. Dramatic masochism would be somebody beating himself. Right? And one of the YouTube links that I shared in the group show you that element. A person beats himself up because he believes he has committed a sin. There is a movie called Angels and Demons. And in that movie, Angels and Demons, there is a character who commits murder for the priest. He is the disciple of the priest. But after committing the murder, he feels very guilty. So he goes into his room and he takes up a hunter kind of thing and beats himself up in front of Jesus. So that self-punishment is there. And then you have the very classical masochist who is experiencing delight, pleasure when beaten up. So the most dramatic manifestation would be somebody asking to be degraded, humiliated, beaten up in a sexual setting and deriving pleasure from it. The most dramatic expression of Masochism. And then we have the subtle expressions. Denial of self-care, denial of doing good to oneself, abdication of pleasures when one can have. And then it goes to the other extreme of Masochism for idealism. Because if you want to follow any ideal, you will always have by and large a choice between the ideal and pleasure. And in more often than not cases, you will have to let go of pleasure to follow the ideal. Any ideal that you follow needs a sublimated masochism. Otherwise, you will always go towards pleasure. Because following of most ideals demands a price be paid in terms of denying yourself the pleasure or the comfort. So that's a very sublimated form of masochism for the sake of an ideal. Take example of parents denying themselves pleasures and investing in the education of the child. It's a sublimated form of masochism. Right?
And the other way would be sadism. Denying the child education and taking pleasure for them.
Right. So you have a choice between sadism and masochism. Take your pick. In everyday context,
this denial of self-care could be an everyday thing.
Not speaking out for what one likes in the social situation. You go to somebody's house and he offers you something that you don't want to eat, but out of social courtesy, you still eat a few pieces of it.
Is that, but there's a very thin line between masochism and just simply being polite, right?
True. So if you have a strict definition that denial of pleasure to oneself is masochism, all of that goes there.
I find that definition to be a bit too harsh.
Okay. What would be more comfortable to you?
I'm feeling very masochistic because I don't want the entire thing to depend on what's comfortable to me. Okay, I'm joking. But I don't know, because I think there needs to be a distinction between someone simply keeping into consideration the other person's feelings. Like suppose I've gone to someone's house and they give me food or whatever and I don't like it. It's basic politeness and keeping into consideration the other person's feelings where I don't say or show my disapproval and I consume the food that is given to me.
Right. So there we have to say that we'll have to differentiate healthy masochism from pathological masochism.
I think where it really makes a big fall to me. I mean, if suppose I am lactose intolerant and I'm given a glass of milk and I don't say no and I drink it, that would be masochism.
Right. So the idea here would be that don't call healthy masochism as masochism,
Yeah.
Give it some other name. So
Yeah,
don't.
because by calling healthy masochism, by calling it healthy masochism, one, I feel like you are making the whole thing very delicate, and there is no room for candidness and those kind of things.
Right. So
Like
this,
it all becomes a label.
so this is the long-standing accusation against psychoanalysis that we pathologize everything. Right? There is no exclusion for the zone of normalcy. Right? So this is a valid suggestion that we should have a healthy zone of normalcy, and our definitions should not intrude in these zones, and we should keep our business outside of these zones, because normalcy is none of our business. It's our goal, but in process terms it's not our business. That's a valid criticism. The counter argument there is that when we use the word sadism and masochism in the psychoanalytic context, we don't only mean pathological sadism, pathological masochism, but we refer to the whole continuum from the pathological to the idealistic, deployment in the ideal conditions, or let me say deployment at the service of ideals. So what they would say is that masochism per se is not a pathological word. It is descriptive of a process, but you don't get that feeling when you hear that word.
I think that comes from the fact that the way masochism and sadism is perceived is a very negative thing. So it's like the society perceives being smart and intellectual as a very idealistic thing, and so the minute someone is labeled as artistic and not smart, it automatically becomes a negative thing. But that is not necessarily a factual thing, because not being smart doesn't make the person bad. So I think it's the fault of the definition and the nature of what masochism means.
So there is a social meaning of the word with its pejorative connotations. And there is a psychoanalytic use of the word as a descriptive word to describe a very generic phenomenon without any value judgment associated to it, and providing it the flexibility to move across the continuum from the extremely pathological to the extremely healthy. So the psychoanalytic use of the word and the understanding of the word in psychoanalytic circles and the use and understanding of the word in everyday colloquial context are two different things. From a colloquial context, what you are saying is absolutely true. It pathologizes the normal. It pathologizes the extraordinary and the supernormal. And the defense from the psychoanalytic point would be that we use it as a descriptive word without loading any value judgment. But this we can get congruent to only after we are into that circuit and we are used to a different way of using that word. From a social standpoint, you are correct. And I would also go to the extent of saying that we should coin different words rather than stretching these words too much. So rather than saying that in a psychoanalytic sense, we mean something different from what is meant in the social sense, it is better to allow the word to have the social meaning and coin a different word for something different in the psychoanalytic sense.
I think I'd just like to add one more point here. I think, like you said, stretching the word too much would lead to one of two things. One, it would make everything pathological. But secondly, it would also lead to normalizing something that is pathological. If in everyday language you use this, for example, depression right now is taken as a very regular thing. If I have one bad day at work or school, I come home and I say, I'm so depressed. And that's very stupid because it's actually an extremely pathological thing.
Right.
Um,
So we see two movements here, pathologizing the normal and normalizing the pathological. So, but I am of the opinion that we are unnecessarily stretching words. We should actually be coining far more words to give different words to different entities and different things to be described, so that this definitional and contextual issues don't arise. Okay. Any example of mythology or art in Masochism?
I'm not too well versed with my.
So the artists, they there are many artists, many actors who to get into the character, they behave like that. For like Nasruddin Shah, he didn't take bath for certain days. I have heard that. So it maybe that is we can call related to artistic masochism. Is it so?
Yeah, he must be preparing for a masochistic character.
Yeah.
One masochism you can see in one character is Devdas.
Yeah.
Who is on this flight of self-destruction.
Yes.
And a more later film of Devdas could be Kabir Singh. I don't know if you've seen it. I'm sure, sir, you haven't seen it.
No, I haven't.
Kabir
Yeah.
Singh, yes.
Yeah. So that is also very,
that is also, yes.
So we can
But that
see,
is, yeah.
Yeah, please go on.
But that is not artistic because maybe that is seen in the film. It is related to, I think that is, I don't know. I don't know. Yes, maybe that is related.
I'm just saying, if you just look at the film as an actual factual event and not see it as a role that has been played, then the character in the film looks masochistic, not the actor in actual life.
So we enjoy masochism by identifying with such characters. So
I enjoy that film by identification.
Yeah.
So yeah.
It is consumption by identification, right? So we live out our masochism by identification. That's a much easier way than to actually pass through pain ourselves. And
this in mythology, this Ram went to the Vanvas, and this Bharat, he remained back. He was masochistic. He was giving pain to himself, like not sitting on the throne and like following. I think that is related to mythology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Also, when Sita decided to go along with Ram, even though she wasn't exiled. I hope I have the story correct.
Yes. So we bring up two important points here, that if you point a strict line and you say voluntary denial of pleasure is masochism, both these characters will be masochistic.
Yeah.
And some people will say this line is too strict. And in case of Bharat, atonement of guilt is not masochism. And in case of Sita, following of ideal and giving the pleasure for that is not masochism. Then it's definitional. If you draw a different line, of course, both of them will be this side. But the strict line, the Freudian line, if you draw, that voluntary denial of pleasure, right, is masochism. Even involuntary denial of pleasure where feasible, otherwise, is masochism. So if you draw that strict line in the stone, no exceptions and no conditions apply, then people are here or there. And of course, such a line will not go into nuances. It is too strict and rigid a line, but it is there. We will later on debate whether this line is correct or we require many lines with conditions attached. Okay, that's a more nuanced understanding of the concept. Okay. So Masochism, you can see it in many songs full of Masochism. There is a very popular ghazal by पंकज उदास, दीवारों से मिलकर रोना अच्छा लगता है, हम भी पागल हो जाएंगे ऐसा लगता है. You can have a very popular Jagjit Singh song. It is मेरी तन्हाई हो तुम ही लगा लो मुझको सीने से, कि मैं थक गया हूं इस तरह रो रो के जीने से. Now these are the songs where the artist has gone into those deep states of suffering and masochism, but because of his artistic ability, he is able to convert it into art and come out of it with a very good production. So it brings us to another point that artists go into these very deep states, but they are not overwhelmed by these states. Because of the creative gift, they are able to convert that strong affect into a creative product, heal themselves in the process, give expression to the unconscious feeling in a very creative way, and come out in a very productive way, and also make a lot of money in the process. Right? So I'm sure many people would have written very gloomy songs, made money out of it, and then had a very merry life out of that money. It's like that existential author Albert Camus, who used to say the only philosophical question is the question of suicide. And he used to say the only question man should ask himself is this: why to live and why not to commit suicide? Ultimately, what to live for? And he went on for all this elaboration in a pessimistic way. Many people read him and committed suicide. This man made a lot of money and was smoking Mexican cigars and having a very good life. So he was able to go into those states, but not be overwhelmed by those states. Creatively use them, create a very good product, come out and sell that product and have a good life. And those who took him very seriously, they took to heart and committed acts which they regretted later. So, Masochism, then voyeurism. Any examples? The pleasure of seeing.
Pornography.
Yeah, pornography is one. Peeping Tom, looking into bedroom of others.
I've noticed that around Indian temples, there are a lot of, I don't know if they're goddesses, but there are a lot of statues of women and even men semi-clothed or sometimes even without clothes. So maybe that also falls under voyeurism.
Even the motivational movies are watched. If we watch someone winning, or that is quite motivational, and that gives us that something inside, a kick inside. So that is also one thing.
Yeah, it's a sublimated form of voyeurism.
Yeah.
Another sublimated form of voyeurism is curiosity. We want to know what is there inside.
Yeah.
The pursuit of the unknown. Everyday example, we do window shopping. We like looking at sweets kept in the sweet shop, chocolates kept in the chocolate shops. We just like to look at good interiors and many things. Or we keep staring at each other.
in a way, looking too much at yourself in the mirror would also be void.
It is at somebody else. That would be narcissism.
Okay. But what if mentally I'm objectifying myself by looking at me in the mirror?
Definitionally, it is put under narcissism because you're looking at yourself. तेरे चेहरे से नजर नहीं हटती, बट किसके चेहरे से उस पे वो डेफिनेशन है. अगर किसी और का चेहरा है, it will go into voyeurism. अगर हमारा चेहरा, it will go into narcissism. आर्ट में
when we think of the characters in the novel, they are usually, we had seen them somewhere in the, they are inspired by them. So we can say that if we are writing or we are painting or we are doing something related to art, they are usually are inspired from the real life. What we see, they come from that.
Narcissism. Pathological example.
This slavery,
Yeah.
that
anyone defending slavery and defending his right to being a master is a sense of pathological narcissism. Anybody who treats his own body as a sexual object is a form of pathological narcissism. Anybody who cannot adjust in any relationship or any organization to work for because he thinks he is grandiose is a form of pathological narcissism. Somebody who is very exploitative and contemptuous, and the type of person who will say, "You will breathe when I say," that is the kind of pathological narcissism. Sublimated narcissism.
Someone who gaslights you.
No, that is pathology.
Like patriotism.
Yeah.
Patriotism is a kind of.
So patriotism or any form of doing something very big in this world, the belief that I will be able to pull off the near impossible for a productive purpose. Yeah, Kiara, you were about to say something.
No, no, I don't.
Everyday form of narcissism. Our looking into the mirror, thinking of ourselves looking too good, our self-belief that we are always right, we are perfect, our belief that we have a right to all the good things in the world, our sense of entitlement as though somebody has promised us that we will always be happy. Our belief that we are never going to die, contrary to the fact that we are going to die. So these are all everyday forms. In mythology, you can see that in many cases, in Indian mythology, in Greek mythology, of course, we have the myth of Narcissus, who died looking at his own image he was in love with. So he saw himself in the mirror, in the river, fell in love with his own self, and died sitting there on the banks of the river because the image could not reciprocate his love. In art also we can see, in many songs in Hindi we have it. If you look at many of the Hindi songs, they are full of narcissism. And we can see James Bond movies, we can see Rajinikanth movies, full of manic narcissism, which we want to live out. So we live out by identification. Let us look at the table. Let us look at some examples. First one, if we take up sadism, the pathological example would be torture. Sublimated example would be being strict with somebody for his own training. In everyday context, you score small points of sadism by scoring points over somebody. So when you score a point over somebody, it hurts that person, but it's like a small prick. But there is a pulse of sadism. In mythology, we can see 4 examples. The first example of Kans, who would throw the babies on the wall to be killed. We can see it Hiranyakashyap. Where do we see it? The way he tried to kill his own son. All of them were full of pain, involving a lot of sadism. In Mahabharata, we can see the death of Abhimanyu, the way he was killed. And in the Buddhist mythology, we can see, not mythology, history actually, we can see the example of Angulimal, the robber who would kill everybody and then take off a finger of that person and preserve it. And from these fingers, he had created a garland which he would wear. A garland made from the fingers cut off from the dead people he had killed. Till he meets Buddha and undergoes a transformation. Similar stories we have about Valmiki also, when he was Valia and not Valmiki. And in art, we can see the sadism. If you look at film Sholay, he cuts off the hands of the character and allows him to live. He won't kill the person. So he would cut off the hands, kill the family members, and leave the person alone to live the rest of his life in humiliation, not being able to take revenge. That would be an act of sadism. In the movie Silence of the Lambs, where do you see? Have you seen the movie Silence of the Lambs? You can see the way he kills. It's very sadistic. Some of the scenes where he kills is very sadistic. So you can see the manifestation of this concept in the pathological context, sublimated context, everyday context, mythological context, and the art context. Similarly, look at the second concept, Masochism. In the pathological context, it would be hurting yourself, self-hurt. Let us say a borderline person cuts himself up. So it would be a pathological manifestation. A very normal thing in the borderline pathology, self-harm. Idealism, sublimation would be denial of pleasure for an ideal, a very sublimated form of Masochism. in the everyday context, it would be adjusting to reduction of pleasure. हिंदी में कहते हैं चला लेना. चला लेने की एक बार आदत पड़ जाए, it becomes a masochistic normal. Whether it is in case of food or clothes or commuting to some place, you can have two options: commuting in pleasure or commuting with some trouble, and you adjust to the trouble even though you can have pleasure. In mythology, we have the character in Mahabharata of Gandhari and Bhishma. Both of them displaying Masochism in different ways. Of course, both of them are showing sublimated Masochism in the pursuit of their ideals. And in film Sholay, you can see Masochism on part of the lady who is a widow. And in the film Red Dragon, you can see the character beating up himself. So sadism and masochism, we are nearing this session. So I'll send a new link, but let us take a 10-minute break, have a cup of tea and join back. Will it be fine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, let's have a cup of tea and join back in 10 minutes.
Okay.